There we go. Okay, so welcome everybody. We've just done our acknowledgement of the traditional owners, and I am missing some slides, which is very annoying. That's okay. Basically, oh no, I haven't. That's okay. We've got the resources was the first slide. So the resources, these slides today, they're up on Blackboard already. So the link I'm going to pop into the chat for you in case you want to go in. And also before that, if you can make sure you put your student IDs into the chat for me, that would be great. There we go. So you can go into Blackboard and you can see the slides, and the recording will be up later today. There's our goals for today. And we're looking at the principles of coherence in academic writing. We're looking at synthesizing and also demonstrating the value of your research. So we have quite a lot on, which is why we're getting started straight away. So basically a couple of different sessions there linked to those goals. And at the beginning now, we're just going to look at some of those key principles. And before that, we've got some questions to get you guys thinking. So here we go. I would like it if you could just jot down the answers to these two questions. Let me know, or just pop them in for your own thoughts, because we will call back to them a little bit later in the session. I'll put them into the chat as well. Michael's already said in the chat he's detail orientated, which is good. All right, so are you big picture or detail orientated? And also, if you can just think of a couple of contributions that you think you might be making with your research, that would be great, because we'll be looking at that again a little bit later as well. It doesn't have to be anything specific. It can be quite broad, just what you've got on top of your head right now. Okay, so today is a writing circle. So we've got an interactive session, we've got exemplars and activities, and we also offer workshops as well, which many of you would have come to before. They're more of the theory and principles, and we do the peer breakouts as well, the peer discussions. So, but today's a writing circle, so heaps to do. Now, did you guys get the UniHub reminder email, and do you have the activity sheet ready? If you can, let me know if you haven't got that activity sheet and I can put it into the chat. So with the writing circles and the workshops, actually, we always send you a reminder email. So if you can get into the habit of going into those, that will be great, because that's where we will put everything that you need for the session in, and they come out at 8 o'clock the day before. So in that was the activity sheet, which I'm going to upload to you now in the chat. And also I asked you to bring along a draft section of your writing. I did ask if you could have 3 or more consecutive paragraphs, so perhaps you can get something ready now. Let me just put the activity sheet in. There you go. All right, excellent. Okay, so you're going to be all ready to go with your draft writing and the activity sheet, but I'll let you know when we're ready to open that one up. Okay, so let's get started for our first section. So what is coherence? Because that's the title of the writing circle today. So it's the quality of being logical and consistent and having a unified whole. So even if you are not quite up to your final thesis, you still have a document that you're preparing, and it needs to be a unified whole. So it needs to stick together, it needs to link, and it needs to be interrelated. So that's what we're talking today about, is that whole thread that needs to go through your documents so that it's very clear to the reader exactly what your research is about and why it's important. Because of course, who are we writing for? We are writing for the reader. And that's something that I talk about all the time in all of our sessions, is it's all about the reader. So the coherence is making sure the reader can follow everything that you're saying. So in academic writing, it's about all the main points in your sections connecting and the whole document as well. So if you're up to your initial stages, then you still need to have a connected document, don't you? But it's just a little bit shorter. We want all the ideas and concepts connected to ultimately, excuse me, answer your research questions. And synthesis and critical analysis is a big part of coherence, and that we're going to focus on those a little bit later. So why is this important that you know what coherence is and you have a coherent document? It's because it is a big document and all the parts need to connect. You need to tell your whole research story, because if you don't have that clear research story, then the value of your research can get lost. Okay. And what we don't want is for your readers to be reading and going, I'm not quite sure what's happening here. We want them to be saying, oh, this sounds good. Yep, I get it. I get it. Okay, we can't have it hard to follow. So sometimes you'll read a document where the sentences are beautiful, the paragraphs are really well structured, but the meaning and the story of the research is not coming out. Okay, so that's why coherence is really important. It's to keep reminding the reader the value of your research. So coherence and cohesion overlap. So coherence, what we're talking about today, is that macro level of your thesis. It's the big picture. All right, the cohesion is what we call the micro level. So it's your vocabulary, your sentence structure, the way you structure your paragraphs as well. So coherence and cohesion, they overlap at the paragraph, okay? Because coherence, we're looking at how your paragraphs in a section join up. And when we're looking at cohesion, we're looking at just the paragraph itself. So we want every paragraph to be cohesive, clear, one main point, and we want the whole document to be coherent and each paragraph to be part of that coherence where you're telling that story with your main points connected. So can get a little bit confusing. Don't worry too much. Coherence is the macro level, the whole document, whichever document you're up to. Cohesion is the paragraph level. Now, we have cohesion document writing circle as well that Tash does. And I'm just going to pop for you into the chat where you can see the cohesion resources on Blackboard. Okay, so maybe that's something that you know that you need to improve is your paragraph structures. So that cohesion writing circle will be really useful for you. Okay, so coherence is the big picture. So remember at the beginning when I said, what are you, detail orientated or looking at the big picture? You need to be both. All right, detail orientated is excellent. Attention to detail is really important. But we also need to be able to step back and look at the big picture. So no matter where you are up to in your PhD candidature or your MPhil candidature, you know, you still need to have the big picture of what is that document needing to do? What is the purpose of it? So your initial research proposals, there to show that your research is valuable and that you should be allowed to go ahead and do your research. Then, of course, your final thesis is telling your whole research story and the implications, conclusions as well. So no matter where you're up to, have a think about what that document needs to look like in the end. Plan how you might structure and write that whole document, and even look forward to once you've got your findings, how are you going to present those? Come up with a bit of a plan by thinking about that big picture. If you get negative feedback about the clarity of your arguments, then that means you do need to step back and look at that big picture because it's clearly not quite where it needs to be, and you can problem solve by rewriting, adding some more information, making your topic sentences maybe more clear, or checking how the flow goes. So by keeping that big picture in mind, you're looking at your sections and your chapters and making sure that they clearly connect. And that's what we're going to be looking at, the strategies for that today. So yeah, attention to detail is still really, really important. All right, so as I said, I really encourage you to plan from the beginning, even if you're not at the final writing up stage. You should have a bit of an idea for all of your documents all of your milestone documents as well, how long you think they'll be, and that's going to help with that big picture planning. If we use the example of a PhD being 80,000 words, would you have 8 chapters of 10,000? I don't think so. Usually the introduction and conclusion are smaller and the other chapters are longer. So if you have a little bit of an idea of how many words approximately you're going to need for a section or for a chapter, it's going to help with your writing and that planning. So you know how many main points you might need. And when you can start to think, oh, I might have too much information. I'm going to go over the word limit. So good idea to have a plan. If it changes, that's okay. At least you've got a guide that you can utilize and then change it if you need to. So don't sort of think, oh, I don't need to worry about the writing up stage, because if you can think about it from the beginning, it will help you in the end. Okay, so yes, you still need to be very flexible. Have those plans, definitely, but be ready to change many times. Now, with that big picture planning, try not to agonize too much. Make a decision. Leave yourself a note why you made that decision. Why did you decide that you thought your lit review should be 8,000 words? Remind yourself why. If it ends up being more or less because it needs to be, that's okay. You've at least made a decision, and then you've got something as a backup. So coherence is very much about this common thread. Okay, so what is your common thread? What is the value of your research? What is your research problem? Those two things go together, okay? Because your value is how you're going to potentially gain insight to solve that research problem. So be very clear, have these answers at all times written down and in your mind about your common thread, because that's what needs to come through in all of your sections and all of your chapters as well. Why do we need your research? What is the research problem? Somebody has asked how many words would an MPhil thesis be? It's going to depend very much on your faculty. Okay, so I would go back and check with your supervisor, and also go on to HiQ and the research student pages. There's a lot of information there as well. If you want to ask me that question again at the end, I can probably get you some links. I just can't go out of the slides right now. All right, so yes, your common thread is really important. Make sure you're very aware of those two very important things, your research problem and the value of your research, because you need to tell the readers over and over again. So writing a thesis, it's a very long process. So you're not going to be able to focus on everything straight away. That's why your planning is really important, and also writing notes as to why you've planned in that way, because we forget why we decided things. So the process of writing your thesis is iterative. It means you're going backwards and forwards throughout the sections and the chapters, and that's okay. That's what you're meant to be doing. So just write, knowing you're going to have to come back and polish up, maybe move some things around, maybe add some more information, maybe take some out, and that's okay. But if you plan and revise your planning, it's going to help you feel focused and avoid a little bit of stress. And of course, as I always remind you guys, seek heaps of feedback right up until submission, because that's going to tell you whether your coherence is clear or not. Okay. All right. Write, and write some more. Read a bit more, write some more. Keep on writing, proofread for yourself, seek feedback. When you're proofreading, check for that common thread, check for the logical flow, and make sure that your so what is there. Your so what is the value of your research. If you tell the reader a whole lot of information about one of the concepts related to your research, you need to tell them why that concept is important and why you've just spent a whole section talking about it. Okay, they can't guess. They can potentially put 2 and 2 together if they understand your topic very well, but you can't ask the reader to put the 2 and 2 together. You've got to do it for them. All right. So regularly reflect on your writing schedule and make sure you seek a lot of feedback, okay, on that coherence to make sure that everything is clear and flowing well. You might think it's flowing well, but we want the readers to know that it's flowing well as well. All right, so a really good strategy for you to help with your planning and how you're going to structure and put together your thesis is to look at other people's. QT has the e-prints. I'm going to pop the link in for you. Oh, no, I'm not. I haven't got it here on this copy. If you just Google, put into e-prints into HiQ or the digital workplace, it'll come up for you. Thanks also for your student IDs. Anyone who's joined a little bit late, if you could pop your student ID in, that would be great. So yeah, the thesis repository, I think it's really a handy thing for all of us. And as you can see how I've circled thesis format, if you're doing by publication, you can find just documents that are by publication or the traditional creative works. And by looking at those, you'll get some good ideas on how to structure your own thesis. Long document formatting. So your documents will need to be in the long Word document formatting, which means it's about your page setup, having your headings, subheadings, margins, and page breaks, and all of those things. It's important that you do that as soon as possible. If you're not quite sure what I'm talking about, I'm just going to pop into the chat. There's a lot of resources on HiQ around long document formatting. Thanks, Rosie, for putting the e-prints into the chat. All right, so there's a few videos and documents about the long word formatting. Don't leave it till the last minute. It can take a few weeks to get everything right for your final thesis. My advice is, no matter where you're up to, if you're even just up to your first few months, try to get into the habit of having all of your documents formatted correctly, and for all your milestone documents as well. And then that'll set you up really well for the final thesis, so you won't be scrambling. The library and GRED get a lot of pleas for help with the day or 2 days before submission of people saying, oh my gosh, I don't know how to do this long Word document formatting. So don't let that be you. Make sure you know how to do that. There's the information that's on HiQ. And there's some videos. You can also find some YouTube videos. All right. Something that happens a lot is people lose their work. Okay, I know it's happened to me. You do not want that to happen, of course. So get a really good system where if you were to lose something, then you might only be a day's work or an hour's work as opposed to weeks and weeks. So have those digital folders and a numbering system, and also back up every day. Books. Really would advise you to get a book that you like, that you think is going to be useful for you, and read through and have a look at all the tips about structuring and having that coherence within your documents. There's a couple of really good ones that I like, but if you went into the library, a lot of them are ebooks as well. So I really recommend, I know it sounds almost a bit silly to read a book about writing, but believe me, it can be really helpful. And these ones are quite good, but there's a whole stack of really good ones that would match your field of study as well. So strongly recommend that to help you. And Think Well is a company that has also a lot of thesis writing resources and help around mental health and, to keep you on track. So I've strongly recommend using as many resources as you can to help you. All right, so that was all the initial admin-y type things. Let's have a look at how you are going to achieve coherence by organizing, connecting, and synthesizing. All right, so here's the strategies we're looking at. Keep your eye on the big picture, tables and figures, subheadings, seems pretty basic, but you'd be surprised what kind of subheadings I see. Synthesizing and using your critical voice. So I think that if you can, scheduling big picture thinking and planning into your diary is a really smart thing to do. Hopefully you're scheduling writing into your diary. I'm sure you're scheduling data collection, those sorts of things if you're in the lab. But if you can also schedule a bit of time for planning, that would be a good way to stay on top of everything and focusing on coherence. There's a lot of mind map tools out there, and you could use those, or you could just use post-it notes, whatever works for you. I would recommend writing a draft synopsis. So basic, it's a little bit like an abstract, but probably a little bit shorter. If it's just for you, then it doesn't have to be perfect, but it'll keep you on track with that, how that entire document is looking and your whole study as well. You could add in any projected results or conclusions. You could share it with your supervisor if you think that's a good way to keep them updated. Another way to keep your eye on the big picture is printing your table of contents out. If you can see your table of contents with all your subheadings, and you could write a sentence under each one to say what the main point is in that section, then that's going to help you to see if you are scaffolding, if you're flowing logically and building up for the reader. The other thing is a reverse outline, which is our activity shortly. And I'm going to show you how to do one of those. So that big picture planning, as we said at the beginning, if you can schedule that into your time, you'll keep on track. And, your big, long document event that you will eventually have will be on track to being structured in a good way. So this is what a research synopsis might look like. You could make your own subheadings. So you can see it's a little bit like an abstract. So this is a strategy for thinking and understanding the big picture, okay? And it's to keep you on track with the problem and the gaps, which are important, of course, your research aims and questions, the research design and how that's linking to those aims and questions, and then of course that all important contribution to knowledge. So this is for yourself, but if you wanted to share with your supervisor, then you could definitely do that as well. Obviously, if you share with your supervisor, it needs to be well written and it can't be sort of dot points. So we're going to go into exemplar 1. Now it's a qualitative research proposal in the field of health. We're going to go into the activity sheet, have a quick read through, and then have a look what a synopsis might look like for those few paragraphs that we have in the exemplar. So with all of our exemplars, and every time you read anything in your field of study, I want you to get into the good habit of noticing as you read. So yes, of course, you're noticing the content because you want that information, but I also want you noticing the mechanics of the writing, because you can then mirror that in your own writing as well. Oh, okay, so we are just going to pop out of these slides for a second. And I'm going to get the activity sheet up. Okay. So hopefully you can see my screen. You can see the document okay. If I can have a yes.
Yep, all good. Thanks, Kerry.
Excellent. Thank you. All right, let's have a quick read through and then we're going to have a look what the synopsis might look like. So this is a research proposal, the construction of pain within a surgical ward, purpose and background of the study. So this is the very beginning of the proposal. Pain management is an aspect of post-operative care which is or is perceived as being poorly managed by healthcare professionals. This is despite a view heralded within the literature that advances in the understanding of pain mechanisms, the action of analgesic drugs, and the development of sophisticated systems for drug delivery mean it is no longer necessary for the surgical patient to suffer from unrelieved pain post-surgery. Unrelieved pain has personal, social, and economic costs. For example, the experience of unrelieved pain has been linked to the surgical patient experiencing complications, thus increasing their length of stay in hospital, which ultimately requires the allocation of additional resources. While the experience of unrelieved pain has been recognised as an undesirable occurrence for surgical patients, the provision of appropriate pain management for surgical patients remains a contentious issue. Okay, so we're going to be looking at this exemplar again a little bit later. So that's the very first paragraph. Hopefully, as you're reading that, you can start to get an idea of the research problem and the sort of questions that they would be asking. This study is based on the belief that a certain way of thinking and speaking about pain dominates the management of a surgical patient's potential or actual experience of pain at the exclusion of or silencing of other ways of thinking and speaking. The potential or actual experience of pain has become a means through which dominant knowledge sources and power relations are maintained and produced through its management. The notion of discourse and the way in which it shapes the form and content of language, both written and spoken, has been extensively explored by Foucault. His analyses of discursive frameworks provide an understanding of the interplay between power, knowledge, and discourses. Pain and its management have become discursively constructed, and the positioning adopted by health professionals in relation to their discourses in pain management need to be identified if effective pain management from a patient-centered approach is to be a reality of practice. Thus, this study aims to explore and explicate the way in which pain is constructed within a surgical ward, the effect of this construction on nursing practice, and the influences of this construction on patient outcomes. Acute pain management for surgical patients involves medical and nursing personnel who share both responsibility for the quality of care the surgical patient receives and the financial costs involved in the delivery of this care. As a consequence, there is the potential for divergence of opinion as to how the surgical patient is to be most appropriately managed, which will influence patient outcomes as well as affect nursing practice. It is unknown how nurses and doctors conceive the work of patients in acute pain management. Don't know how you say that person's name. Fagerhoff and Strauss have argued pain management takes place within an organizational and interactional context, and that medical and nursing care involves politicized action. As a result, Fagerhoff and Strauss believed that a critical examination of pain management in routine situations was necessary to improve the accountability of all concerned to prevent the phenomenon of problem pain patients. However, it is significant to note that Fagerhoff and Strauss did not specifically address the influence of power relations on pain management. Rather, they focused on the personal pain philosophies of nurses and doctors as being a key determinant of patient outcomes. Thus, this study seeks to build upon the research by applying a post-structuralist framework to acute pain management for the surgical patient. The interest of this study is to explore the social construction of pain by major care providers in an acute post-operative ward, namely nurses and doctors. Okay, so there's a lot going on there, but I would be interested in how you're feeling as the reader. So it's a research proposal. So it's really important that the reader is quite clear from the beginning what the research problem is and what the research aims would be. So if we pop out of this right now, and we go back into our slides, rightio. So now the construction of pain within a surgical world, that was the thesis title. Now, one of the reasons why I've chosen this as an exemplar is because we would all understand the idea of pain. Not everybody's had surgery, but we could all understand, we might know someone that has, and we can understand the idea of pain. And also you could potentially also understand that people have different pain thresholds, don't they? You probably know somebody who has a really high pain threshold, that even might be you, or a very low pain threshold when they're very easily hurt. So by using this exemplar and reading through it as we just did, the research problem and gaps, I felt like they were clear. I'll be interested to know if you felt like they were clear. The sentences were quite long, weren't they? But they were structured correctly. And realistically, we do aim for those complex sentences, okay? But I would also say that there was probably a few times where they could have divided it into 2 sentences. I'm not sure whether you felt like that. And don't forget, you know, with these exemplars, you're the reader. You have the feeling that you have based on how you've read it. Okay, so you know, don't feel like if it was a little bit difficult to read, that's okay. That's because it's a topic that probably, you know, we don't know exactly about, but we do understand the idea of pain. All right, so research problems was that unrelieved pain had personal, social, and economic costs. Okay, so that makes sense. And then they also said that how to relieve pain is still something that's contentious. So that could be something that you might have experienced if you have had an operation, is, you know, for how long you're supposed to be on those pain meds. So they've articulated a research problem, and the gap is that the fact that it's still contentious. The research questions, it look like, how is pain constructed within a surgical ward, and what the effect of this construction has on nursing practice. So they're focusing on nurses, although they did mention doctors as well. And then, how is pain constructed? So how do nurses understand pain? Do they think that the patient should harden up? Do they think that, you know, they should be allowed to have more drugs? So that's what their angle that they're going for. And then depending on what the nurses are thinking, how does that then affect the client outcomes? Because remember, they said that if the patient is in pain post-surgery, they may end up needing to stay in hospital longer, which would be part of the economic cost, wouldn't it? So the research design, ethnographic, so that means that the person writing it is themselves a nurse or a doctor. They were going to make observations. They're going to do interviews. They're going to review the nursing and medical documentation. And contribution to knowledge was patient satisfaction. with pain management will be enhanced. So if you can write a synopsis like that, no matter what stage you're in, with basically those subheadings, it's going to help you to stay in touch with the big picture and help you to understand what might be important in all your different chapters and sections. So now, using the same exemplar, we're actually going to do our reverse outline. So it's a little bit different to the synopsis, where you're writing it basically from where you're pulling the sentences out and putting them into the synopsis. We're almost doing, it's the reverse of a plan, basically. So I'm just going to pop out of the slides again. All right. So let's have a look. Let's pop down and have a look at the steps. All right. So constructing a reverse outline. So like I said, it's actually the opposite of a plan. With a plan, we do our subheadings and our dot points. So the idea of this is that we can analyze what you've already written to see how the flow and the coherence is looking. So basically, you identify the main point of each paragraph and then examine the outline to see whether the connections are all flowing. Now, something to consider, so you could be doing this for your draft writing that hopefully you have ready. But what I would say is, when you are doing this for yourself, I've just put this note in here that try to just focus on the text as it is now. And as you're reading it, you're probably going to notice things that you want to correct or add. So if you can just try not to do that at the time, instead just try to leave a note and then do it later. Otherwise, you're going to sort of get all caught up in fixing what you've written and forget about the idea that you're looking at the big picture. All right. So we know that we have 3 paragraphs. So we're just going to go number 1, number 2, number 3.
Are you sharing your screen at the moment?
Oh, I think so. Is it not coming up?
It says that you've started sharing, but it's black, so maybe it's...
Oh, okay. Okay. What about if I go here? Can you see that now?
Not sure.
No?
Hi, Carrie, just confirming the screens also.
Right. Okay.
Now.
Hang on a minute. All right, let's try again. How's that? Can you see it now?
I can see it.
Thank you.
Yeah? Okay. Good. So what I was looking at was the steps to construct the reverse outline. All right. So you should have this in front of you. So reverse outline, we've got 3 paragraphs. So what do you think is this main point of paragraph 1? So pain management might be poorly managed. There's a view that patients don't need to suffer. I think this is important. the fact that we've got these costs, because it's starting to set up the research problem. Is there anything else we should pull out? Probably this bit, isn't it? Oh, oh. All right. So remember that this is the very first paragraphs of a research proposal. So with our paragraph 1, we've got unrelieved pain has personal, social and economic costs. And we've got the fact that if there's still a contentious issue about how to deliver pain management. All right, what about paragraph 2? This study is based on the belief that a certain way of thinking and speaking dominates the management. So I think that that's important, because what is that sentence doing for the reader? It's setting up the research design, isn't it? Because they're going to talk to people about and look at the language that's used. So they're talking about discourse here. So this second paragraph is really leading us into the way that the research is going to be done. So do you feel like this first paragraph told us enough about the beginning of the problem? I think yes, because it's very hard to say everything in one paragraph, but certainly this last bit about there being a contentious issue. I think this is good, this second paragraph, because it's telling us and giving us an idea of the research design. And I think obviously we would want to pull this out for our reverse outline about the study aim. And then what about the last paragraph? What's it doing? What's the role of this paragraph here? Okay, so the fact that you've got numerous people involved, so they're our stakeholders, aren't they? So if we have a look at the beginning paragraph, it's quite broad, isn't it? It doesn't mention who the stakeholders would be, other than obviously the patients. Then we know from paragraph 2 how the research is probably going to be done. It's talking about discourse and Foucault. And look at this, there is the potential for divergence. So again, linking back to the idea that there's a problem. What else could we pull out of here? So again, so this looks like a seminal study in this topic. So we needed accountability. Right, so they haven't talked about power relations. So again, it's coming back to what exactly the research is about, isn't it? So, and then this study seeks to build upon their research by applying, and then they're saying, so if you are able to do that for your own writing, if you've got your draft writing there and you've got a couple of paragraphs, have a look. Now, depending on what chapter or section it is that the draft has come from, there'll be an aim, won't there? You know, if it's like this, where it's a research proposal, it's really important to get a whole lot of information out to the reader quite quickly, such as the research problem, the research aims, and of course, it's also really good to give the reader an idea of what kind of research it is that the research design is going to be. Now, you guys are either writing your proposals or you already have written your proposals, and you'll know that that is difficult. It's difficult to tell the reader everything at once. But for the aim of this reverse outline, if we have a look, so the first paragraph is quite broad, isn't it? And it's really telling us the broad topic. The second paragraph, it's telling us, giving us a bit of background of the research design, as I said. And then the last paragraph is narrowing a little bit, and it's giving us more of an idea of the problem. We've got this shared responsibility, and it's letting us know that these would be the stakeholders that are being investigated, potentially the participants and respondents, and also bringing in what I would imagine is a seminal, some seminal researchers. So if you have somebody like that within your field of study, it's a good idea to get them in quite quickly into that research proposal. So I think that overall we can see from doing the reverse outline and from doing the synopsis that this study seems to be flowing quite well. And as the reader, we can get the big picture quite quickly. Now, if your draft that you're looking at the moment is from another section, perhaps it's your lit review. So think about the objectives of the chapter or the section that you are trying to give to the reader. And as you're doing your reverse outline, check to see that you're achieving that aim of what you want for that section, and that you are scaffolding for the reader. So starting a little bit broad and then narrowing in and telling them everything they need. Or are the paragraphs jumping? You know, are you going from one topic and then to another without sort of leading the reader through? So that's the idea of the reverse outline. Okay. I'm going to go back to our slides. So while I'm doing that, keep on going with your reverse outline. And as I said, so you're identifying the main point, then you're looking to see, okay, how is it flowing? And you can go back later and keep on going with this activity, or use it for another section of your writing. But one thing with the activity, as I said, is try not to go off task. If you're in a paragraph and you realize, oh, that's not written the way I need it to be, just leave yourself a note and keep on going with what you're doing, and then you can come back a little bit later. All right, so I'm going to stop the share. And I'm going to go back into our slides. So hopefully you've been able to do a little bit of a reverse outline for yourself. There we go. All right. So did you have a go at the outline? I hope so. If not, try it later. All right, particularly with a whole section or a section that's been very difficult to write, and you've been sort of not quite sure if everything's flowing well. All right, so let's keep going with our strategies to achieve coherence. So tables and figures are really helpful for the reader, as long as they're clear and provide the information in a way that the reader can very quickly look and get a good idea of what's happening. You don't want them to be too complicated, is probably something to keep an eye out with your tables and figures. So I would also say, if you are going to use tables or figures, that don't put one and then abruptly end a section. It's really important to not only present it, but also tell the reader what it is that you want them to see in the table or figure. We're going to look at an example in a minute. It's also important to make sure you are consistent with the way you label your tables or figures. I'm just popping into the, it hasn't come through the link. If you go into apa.org, if you are using APA style, there's a section on tables and figures, and APA 7 is now very easy, much easier than it used to be, and tables and figures are actually labeled the same. They used to be different, but now they're exactly the same. So I'll show you that in a second. But definitely try to avoid having a section and then a table or a figure and then going to another section. That's not good for the reader. We want to know what it is that you want us to notice in that table or figure. So here's an example. I have used this one a number of times. basically, why I use this one is the fact that this is a complicated research design. As you can see, there's 3 phases. And even though the thesis would have had a complete section or more of each of these phases and explaining them, as the reader, we can very quickly see exactly what's happening. So you can see the timings, the purpose is important. Make sure with your research design that each part of your data collection and data analysis that you're very clear to the reader about the purpose. Okay. So here is another example. Now this is a map, obviously, and this is from a thesis which investigated Currumbin Creek on the Gold Coast. There's a lot of dredging of the creek opening to the ocean. So looking at some different ways to cut some costs with that so it's still usable, the creek mouth. So what I want you to notice there is see how it's been introduced at the beginning. Currumbin Creek is a small tidal inlet situated in southeast Queensland, Australia. See figure 3.1. Now, figure 3.1 is bold, and underneath in italics is the label, and it is capitalized. So that's the APA 7 format for both figures and tables. And then what I want you to notice is underneath the map is a little spiel telling you what to look at. Okay. It's situated Currumbin, in between Currumbin and Palm Beach, which you can see on the bigger map, and then you can see where it is in Australia. Okay, so make sure you always give a little bit of information after your table of figures so the reader knows what they need to be looking for. All right, so subheadings is part of Coherence because we will look at them as the reader and it'll give us some information. Now, if the subheadings aren't clear, so say in your findings chapter, you have a subheading that says introduction. Okay, but an introduction to what? And didn't you have an introduction chapter? Same with conclusion. Try to avoid those subheadings, but also give a little bit of information so that we can understand what the topic is about for each subheading, rather than making them vague. So something you can do for yourself is have a look at your table of contents and see if it's clear. See whether you're leading the reader through with your subheadings. Here's an example. So the thesis is titled Determined to Make a Difference, a study of public health nursing practice with vulnerable families. Now, what do you notice about this table of contents? Chapter 1, there's a section public health nurses, okay, telling us about them. Then vulnerable families, interesting, that's straight from the title, isn't it? Which is good. Significance of the study. What about the literature review? History of public health nursing within New Zealand, very clear. We know exactly what's going to be in that subheading, don't we? All right, so if you can make sure your table of contents is clear like that, you'll be well on your way to setting up your big picture. Now, just because you've got a clear subheading though, good, but also make sure that the first sentence after it actually has the words from the subheading. Again, seems a little bit obvious, but I see this all the time. I see a subheading and the very first sentence has no words from that subheading in it. All right, so we don't want that. There's an example, quite a clear subheading, academic reading, fundamental part of academic literacy, sorry. And then you can see that the sentence clearly talks about academic reading, doesn't it? Okay, now what happens if we put, this was an example, this was the second sentence under that subheading. So it's got the word academic literacy, but it doesn't say anything about reading. So as the reader, we would be thinking, okay, but what? Not quite making sense, is it? So another activity for you to do when you're looking at your subheadings is check the first sentence and make sure that it flows, okay? All right, so now we're getting to the really important strategies about coherence, and that is synthesis and critical analysis. Now you'll hear these words a lot. Perhaps your supervisors are saying, oh, you need more synthesis or you need more critical analysis. So I've got the dictionary definitions there. So synthesis is the mixing of different ideas to make a whole. Okay, so pulling everything together. Critical analysis is almost pulling it apart. Okay, so you're pulling it apart to evaluate every different aspect of a topic. So let's have a little look further. So synthesis. So let's look at an example. We need to have that in our lit review, of course. So the idea there is that you have multiple sources and ideas, and you're making the judgments on what you're reading to gain evidence into the problem and the gaps. So synthesis within your lit review is the idea of pulling all the research together to get a feel for the research field as a whole. And then that is going to help us to get the research gap. So it's a holistic insight into the literature. Now, if you only have one or two sources, it's going to be hard to get that holistic insight, isn't it? Now, within a discussion, you're then adding to that synthesis by bringing your evidence in as well that you've found from your research. So what we don't want is that common feedback that says your lit review lacks synthesis. So what that would probably mean is that you are taking a study and saying, these people did this, then another study, these people did something else, and then another one, these people did something else. So that's descriptive. All right. So yes, you need to describe previous research, but you need to pull them in together and make judgments and say, okay, these people did something, however, somebody else did something else that found something slightly different, or someone added something. So pulling it all in together is what the synthesizing means. So we don't want summary after summary of the previous studies, and you do need to read widely, which I'm sure everybody is doing. And within a paragraph, if you are synthesizing well, you're not going to have the same source over and over again within one paragraph. So we want to have different sources, supporting with evidence of your main points. That's something as well that your examiners will be looking for. They'll be looking to check that you've read widely and that you have a really good understanding of the field. Okay, so exemplar 1 that we have already gone in and looked at a couple of times. So I'm not going to go out of the slides this time, but you can go into the activity sheet if you want to. Again, I want you to notice, okay, so we're looking for their synthesizing and also referencing conventions, because that is obviously part of the literature. So here's our first paragraph that we've already read through a couple of times. So looking at two things, synthesis. So are they making judgments about similarities or differences? And what do you think of the referencing, the in-text referencing? So I've highlighted a couple of things for us to have a look at. So I would say the synthesis is quite good. They've clearly read widely. I've actually pulled out a lot of the citations. That first one there, I think there was another 5. So there was a lot of sources there. But, you know, they've got that big broad sentence at the beginning. And then they've clearly said, you know, pain management is perceived as being poorly managed, despite these advances in the understanding of pain mechanisms. and the sophisticated systems for drug delivery. So yeah, there's synthesis there. You can see that the author is saying, okay, there's this one school of thought, despite all these advances that the literature have been talking about. As far as the referencing goes, what do you think? Looks like APA, doesn't it? Do you agree? So it most likely is. Obviously, we can see this is an old proposal of it, you know, because of the references are so old. The thing with APA is that your in-text citations need to be in alphabetical order, not in the order of when they've been published. So I've highlighted Winefield there because that US Department of Health would have to come before it, okay, if it was correct APA style. So don't forget that. And I've also, actually, no, I highlighted Winefield because APA 7, like I said, have made, if it's more than 3 authors, it's always et al. Michael said in the chat. Yeah, in APA 7, this is new. In APA 6, if it was 3 or more authors, you had to put all of the authors the first time. Well, in APA 7, you can put et al. From the beginning. You don't have to put them all. So that's a nice thing for APA 7. And yes, I've highlighted Kilham et al. There because yes, it would have to be the first citation in that group there if we were going in alphabetical order. All right. So yeah, I think it is APA, but potentially there was different rules in the 1990s. But as far as an example of synthesis, I would say yes, it is good because there's a range of sources and there's comment made, you know, as far as the discrepancies in the literature, so to speak. All right. So synthesis is pulling everything together. Critical analysis is almost the opposite, really, because we are breaking down everything, examining and making judgments. And part of the critical analysis and why we're pulling everything apart is we want ourselves initially and then ultimately the reader to achieve a deep understanding of what we know already, so our previous studies, and why we need to know more. So what we need to do to have critical analysis is be explicit and be really clear and make our judgments clear in our voice. So yeah, you have your citations as part of your synthesizing, particularly in the lit review, but within that, you can't have citation after citation, okay? We need your voice in there. Now, generally, I would recommend that the topic sentence is your voice. Then you can have some evidence to support it. And then you need those critical sentences that say, this means, this shows, where you're making comment about the information that you've presented to the reader. So we don't want that common feedback lacks critical analysis. So let's have a look how you avoid that. Strong word choice is really important, okay? As the image says, words have power. So we're going to look at some examples shortly, but by using strong vocabulary that tells the reader explicitly what you mean. So if you're saying previous studies have provided questionable data, you're putting a comment there to say we can't trust this data, right? If you're saying previous studies have provided comprehensive and detailed data, then you're saying this is good information. So you can see how having good vocabulary that is very explicit is going to help you to show your critical voice. And then those sentences that say this finding is significant because that's your comment. You know, previous sentence you will have said someone found this significant because of this reason, or this could be even about your own study. You know, you've in your discussion, you're explaining something that you found, and then you're saying why it's significant and being very explicit and clear. Okay, so critical voice and being explicit with strong word choice. So here's our exemplar again. This is, I think, the second paragraph that we already read. That's why I read it out at the beginning, because we're using it a few times. So we've already read it. You'll notice I pulled out the citation so I could make the text a bit bigger. All right. So what are we looking for? We're looking for critical voice. So I've highlighted where this author has used their voice. See if you agree. It's perceived as being poorly managed. We're pretty clear. That means not managed well, right? It's very clear. This is despite a view heralded. Heralded is an interesting word, isn't it? Heralded means it's like, hey, look at this idea. Isn't it great? Okay, so the literature is saying that all of these advances in drug delivery and understanding pain mechanisms have been shouted from the rooftops, really, in the literature. However, we still are having this poorly managed post-operative care regarding pain management. So you can see just in those two sentences with the wording they've used, we're very clear. Unrelieved pain, so that's very clear, isn't it? And quite strong. Experiencing complications, thus increasing the length of stay, bringing us back and making it really clear that this is a problem, right? And this is linking to that bit about the personal, social, and economic costs. And then good sentence structure again, while the experience of unrelieved pain has been recognised, so there are some researchers looking at it, it still remains a contentious issue. So not any other kind of issue, a contentious one. It's a strong word, isn't it? Okay, so this is how you show your critical voice. Now, there's 1, 2, 3 sentences there with citations, but we've got those other sentences that are the author's voice, and we've got that strong vocabulary. So helping you with that critical voice is the Manchester Academic Phrase Bank, which I talk about all the time. It was down for a week or so, a few weeks ago, which was a bit panicking, but it's back up and running. They must have made it better, which is good. But definitely use that. You'll see there where I've circled being critical, explaining causality. It's really an excellent resource. It's going to help you to make sure that your critical analysis is clear and explicit. All right, so let's have a look at demonstrating the value of your research. So remember where we're at. Coherence is supporting and developing your argument and contribution through every section and chapter. So what we want is those first 3 chapters of your final thesis or your proposal. So your introduction, lit review, and methods. They're setting everything up so that the reader understands and is really clear about what you're doing. And then we can look forward to your results, discussion, and conclusion. So you're telling your clear and explicit story, you're making your so what very clear, and you're keeping the reader informed. So your chapters and your sections are stepping stones, and they need to be connected. So what's your research story? Well, you have a beginning, a middle, and an end. You've got your characters as well. Introduction, hey, there's a problem. Lit review, here's the evidence to the problem and the research gap. Methodology, this is how I'm going to investigate it. And then everything else is your evidence and your solutions to that problem that you've posed very well in introduction, lit review, and methodology. So I said stepping stones. So it's exactly like we just saw, isn't it? It's your introduction, your middle, and your end. So by the end of the study, your readers jumped across all the steps and they're pretty clear about how you got to these conclusions and recommendations. More than pretty clear, very clear. All right. So thinking about your chapters, now, if you're up to your proposal stage, this might be your sections as opposed to chapters, still the same thing where you've got those connections. Your lit review and methods, people don't often think about this, but they're connected because your lit review is where you begin to justify your research design based on the literature. The lit review and discussion, they're complete mirrors. Everything that's in your lit review should be mentioned in your discussion, vice versa, with the discussion having the added thing of your evidence as well. Methods and results are connected, of course, because how did you get your results? From your research methods. Your introduction and conclusion are mirrors as well. That's why when you're writing your conclusion, you should always go back to your introduction and make sure everything's connected. So all part of coherence is this connection and continually reminding the reader what's happened and what's important. So make the value of your research explicit. So as we keep saying in your introduction and your lit review, hey, there's a research problem, there's research gaps. What have you got to support these claims? All your evidence that you've synthesized from the literature. How are we going to investigate this claim that there's a problem? Well, we're going to have a paradigm, we're going to have research design, we're going to have methods. And then how are you going to articulate that value in the end? It's your contribution. So remember at the beginning, and I said to you, what do you think your contribution is going to be from your study? If you were able to write something down, then that's great because you're already, getting there as far as making that contribution really clear, because all of those beginning chapters and sections are all leading to that final contribution, aren't they? So you're planting the seeds the whole way through. That's what we are talking about with coherence. Two really good resources to help you with this whole idea of connecting everything and articulating the value of your research. I strongly recommend both of these. The book's a little bit old, but it's very good. If you don't want to read another book, have a look at the video on YouTube. It's excellent. All right, activity 2. Is the value of your research clear? Now, remember the reverse outline activity that we did? I'm not going to go in and do that activity for exemplar 1 because I feel like we already went through that and I want to get to the other exemplar quite quickly. But when we were looking at that exemplar, it was quite clear those first 3 paragraphs, weren't they? It was quite clear about the problem. It was quite clear about how the research was going to be undertaken, and there was a clear research aim, wasn't there? So wanting to know how the nurses articulate and perceive pain for the idea of being able to improve the way that post-operative care is given. So I feel like that the value in that exemplar was quite good. So if you wanted to go into your document that you have open, hopefully, have a look really quickly and see, remember the contributions that we wrote down. Are you starting to plant those seeds with what you've got there in your document? Are there explicit statements around what the research problem is and then leading towards what the anticipated contribution might be? So have a check and see if you have that in your draft. If you have, great, highlight it. If you haven't in those paragraphs, potentially if you've got 3 or more paragraphs there, maybe it's in the final paragraph or the beginning paragraph, which is great. So that is potentially enough. There will be some paragraphs as you go through your sections where maybe you haven't got very much around the problem or the aims because you're just giving the information about the concepts, and that's okay. But I wouldn't go more than sort of 3 or 4 paragraphs without reminding the reader about either the problem or the aims, or planting that seed towards that contribution. So I'll just give you another minute to have a little look through your document. If you think that those explicit statements are missing, write a note, and when you go in later, you can improve those paragraphs. All right, so this is our last bit of the section before we get into our exemplar. Keeping the reader informed is a really big part of coherence. You really need sections and chapters to start with the paragraph. Well, the chapters would start with the paragraph. Sections might just have a couple of sentences. Just remind the reader the aim and the function of the chapter. You might want to talk about the research questions. You definitely remind them about the aim and let them know how the chapter is structured. What can we expect? What's included? Let's have a look. So we're going to have a look at an example of a results chapter. You can have a look at it in the activity sheet. I'm going to stay with the slides. So those in a results chapter, the types of information the reader would be wanting at the beginning is just a little reminder about how the data was collected and what are the findings doing in terms of our whole research design and the whole research aims and questions. It's a good idea to remind the reader of that. Here's an example here. It's in the document, the activity sheet. This chapter presents the phase 1 quantitative survey findings. The findings were derived from the results of the questionnaire that was used to explore first-year EAL students' academic expectations of studying at an English-speaking university. The data was analysed using SPSS and descriptive analysis. The first aim of the survey was to gain a broad picture of the population under investigation to inform case study recruitment, and 2 additional objectives were to use the survey results to highlight issues for further examination and respond to research question 1, which asked, and there's the question. So, how do you feel about that beginning paragraph? It's clear, isn't it? Do you agree? What do you think about those first 4 sentences? Do they help? So this is literally the first paragraph of chapter 4, which is clearly the survey findings. Do you think that's useful for the reader to know what's in the chapter? How were the findings obtained? How was the data analysed? And what was the aim of that portion of the data collection? I think it's necessary. How many sentences you need? Maybe you only need 1 or 2 in your document. So there's quite a bit going on there. What do you think about reminding the reader about the research question? Do you think that that's useful? And where else do you think the research question might be provided? So this is chapter 4. Potentially the research questions might have been posed in the lit review. Maybe they're being posed in the introduction or the methods chapters. That's going to be up to you. Definitely they would be posed before chapter 4. So this is repeating, but I think that that's a good idea. So have a think about where your research questions are currently located. Introduction, lit review, methods. No right or wrong, depends. Your supervisors will have an idea of what they like and have a think about what you like. Keep the reader informed, part 2. So we've got those summaries at the beginning or that introduction, and then at the end, you need to recap each chapter and say what the main points are. Possibly it's been quite a long chapter. The readers had to do a lot. So we want to recap everything and give them a summary. How the information links to the next chapter if appropriate. Some supervisors don't like you to write the next chapter will do something. Some supervisors want you to do it, so you'll have to double check that. Okay. So one thing to note about those recap paragraphs at the end of a chapter, or even a section if that's what you need, there needs to be more than just being descriptive. That's where your critical analysis comes in again, to make sure the reader's very clear about how your argument has been advanced. All right, so here's our example. The survey findings presented in this chapter provided an overview of respondents' demographics and academic expectations used to develop the case study protocols and research question 1. That should say respond to research question 1. The data analysis showed respondents were studying in disciplines across the university, came from diverse cultural backgrounds. The university's international student cohort data was reflected. This suggested the survey findings could be representative of the research population under investigation, therefore were appropriate to inform the case study recruitment. Okay, so there's another 7 paragraphs in this summary. So a lot of information, obviously, in that findings chapter. Let's just have a look. So remember, in that first chapter, the survey aims were given in a very clear way, weren't they? And then this first paragraph of the summary, it responds to each of those aims. Okay, so they're the sorts of things I want you to think about for your reader and your coherence of the document, is that A, your chapter does what you said it would do, and B, in your summary, remind the reader of what happened and what you said in that introductory paragraph or paragraphs or sentences or whatever it is. So it's almost like a mirror again, isn't it? It's like your chapter has come full circle. You've said what you're going to do, you've given it all that information, and then you're just doing the recap with that good critical analysis that's advancing your argument. So you can see for that sentence 4, the aim of the survey was to inform case study recruitment, and because the results of the survey reflected the research setting, then it was a fair thing for then those findings to be used to inform the case study recruitment. So I hope that makes sense. But you want those good introductory and summary paragraphs to keep the reader in the loop and informed. All right, excellent. We have done well with our timing. We're going to go into exemplar 4. Now, it's very long. I'm actually not going to read it out like I would normally, because I think you've got enough of my voice. So I am going to give you 5 minutes to read it or 3 or 4 or 5 minutes while I switch screens and I bring it up, and then we'll go through it to answer the exemplar questions. So open up the activity sheet and start reading exemplar 4 for me. Now, just as we're getting started, a lot of the feedback that I get from the writing circles is you guys want exemplars from a range of fields, which of course is a very good thing. Now, the thing with exemplars is that I need to make sure that they are on topics that everyone can have a little bit of an understanding of. So obviously the one we had before was on pain management. We can kind of understand pain management. We obviously don't know as much as the researcher. So this exemplar is from the field of physics. So there's, a little bit of information that a lot of us won't know about, but the writer has done an excellent job in making things quite clear, I believe. So, well, I feel like they have. So I hope that you feel the same. And the key thing I want you to think about is relax, take your time, focus on the readability. I found it good. That's why I've chosen it as an exemplar. I would never choose something that wasn't well written as an exemplar. So it's okay if there's things that you're like, I'm not quite sure. I want you to just get the overall meaning, because we're going to pull it apart and look at the synthesis and critical analysis and the things we've been looking at. The other thing is the referencing style. I'm not exactly sure what they've used. Potentially it's Chicago or even that AIP, all right, because it's footnotes, all right, but it's definitely not APA, which is fine as well. All right, so you guys are hopefully reading that exemplar 4. I'm going to be quiet for a second and pull it up onto the screen, hopefully properly this time. Okay, so hopefully you can see my screen okay now. Is that a yep?
Yep, all good.
Okay, great. Thank you. All right, so hopefully you've been reading ahead. So as you can see, 2015, I've manipulated the text a little bit because it was 8 paragraphs, which was a bit too much. I feel like 5 paragraphs is potentially too much for us as well, but which is why I'm not reading it. The comparison of standoff Raman spectroscopy techniques for the detection of concealed explosives. Now, this was the very beginning of the document. It's a stage 2 research proposal, so that'll put it in a bit of context. How are you going? Shall we get started on the questions, or would you like a little bit longer to read? Please be honest. We've got time. We're doing well for time.
I needed a little more time.
Perfect, perfect. All right. All right, so we are almost at the end. There's just a couple of more things to tell you guys. But while I am doing that, I would, if you don't mind, what we're doing is our surveys a little bit differently now. So if you click on this link right now, I'm going to give you 2 minutes. You can click on the link And it's quite quick. It's literally a 2-minute survey with only a couple of questions. So why we're doing these now, the surveys, is because the other ones were quite long. And this one is, you're able to do it right now while everything's fresh in your memory. So if you can click on that in the chat, that would be excellent. And you can fill in the couple of questions. And while you're doing that, main takeaways for today: consider the reader, make sure the value of your research and the research problem is clear, planning time for the whole document, looking at the big picture, using those strategies, the reverse outline, the table of contents, the synopsis, whatever it is, to make sure everything's connected. And of course, seek feedback. So when you're asking for feedback from your supervisors or from your peers or whoever it might be, ask them, is the whole section logical and clear? So coming up Thursday, so that's tomorrow, we've got a HDR Writers Wellbeing Lounge with Tash. Also tomorrow, the MPhil Symposium. If you haven't been to one of those, I would recommend looking at how other students are presenting their research. You can be in the audience, the virtual audience. We've got an academic writing workshop next week and a how to be more competitive in research as well. Now, I'm going to pop into the chat for you. This is where all the registrations are on HiQ. So HiQ has all the training opportunities. You get your HDRE update emailed to you. Everything's on Blackboard, as you know. Facilitated peer feedback sessions, they're new in 2021. Going quite well. Students who are coming are enjoying those. The critical discussion is excellent. The feedback that they're getting is good from their peers as well. So please come along to one of those. Now, why are peer feedback sessions good? It's because it's going to help you improve your feedback literacy, which is really important. That's in the chat I've just put. So there's 3rd of August and 24th of August for the feedback sessions, peer feedback sessions. That's how you can book those. So feedback literacy is all about seeking feedback and also acting on feedback. So that's something the peer feedback sessions can help you with. We've also got, as I said, the Writers Lounge. And there's one of those tomorrow if you're interested in those. Put in the chat how you can register. All right, so hopefully you were able to do that survey for me. I might just put the link back in case you missed it. And we did pretty good with the timing, which was good. There's a link for the survey again. But if you wanted to pop on your microphone or put a question in the chat, happy to answer anything. Excellent, thanks Rosie. She's done the survey. So yeah, any questions? We've got a little bit of time. We did pretty good with our timing. As I said, I do try to mix up the exemplars so that, I can try to include as many fields of study as I can. But of course, those exemplars need to be available for me. But yeah, as you're reading the articles and books, but mainly the journal articles in your field of study or someone else's thesis, because you're going to go on to ePrints and have a look at some, just look at the way they write, look at the flow and the structure and how they lead the reader through, because that's what you want to replicate, And as I said, looking at the big picture, it's really important to keep that research problem and the value of your research really clear all the way through. Anyone got a question? Still a few people here. Michael said, yes, please. Does that mean that, yes, please, you have a question? You can pop your microphone on if you want. By the way, I'm just putting my email in case anybody wants the annotated activity sheet. Are you typing your question, Michael? You can pop your, okay. He's going to email me. All right. Anyone got a question? We've still got quite a few of you in here. I know it was a lot of information, but the slides are up on Blackboard and I'll pop the recording up later on today. Oh, excellent. Everybody's starting to head off for lunch, which is great. Thank you for coming along. Hopefully you will put your student numbers in too, by the way, into the chat. Thanks, Liam. Thanks, Sarah. So thank you everybody for coming along. And as I said, let me know if you have any questions or you want that annotated worksheet, email me and I will see you guys again soon.